Okay. This is a really strong microphone, right? Yeah, I think so. I don't. I mean, let me try. It's better. Oh, okay. Great. So, welcome to Nano server session, the opening session for today's Powershell event. We have some great session today, I hope. So, my name is Alexandar Nikolic. I'm a freelance Powershell and Azure trainer. I'm also cloud and data center management MVP, as well as Microsoft Azure MVP. So I'm a co-founder of PowershellMagazine.com, a site that I'm running with some fellow MVPs. And you can find me on Twitter and follow me as Alexandar. So what's the agenda for today? We'll talk about what is Nano Server, how to deploy it as a VM, how to manage Nano Server, and then we'll talk about something new, Azure-based server management tools that are created first to manage Nano Server, but now you can use it also to manage other installation options of a server. How many of you are familiar with Nano Server before I start with this? Oh, half a room there, that's good. So you're probably familiar with this slide. This is one of those that Microsoft is using for all the Nano Server sessions they have, and it shows you the server journey by Microsoft. So if you remember when they started, the difference between server NT4 and workstation was just the registry key, actually, that Mark Rusinovich found out, and then caused some problem for Microsoft actually. So they tried to change it, and then he will find a new one, and at the end he was hired by Microsoft, I think. So now he's the CTO of Azure. So the difference between workstation and server was not that big in the beginning. And we practically had all the desktop experience with a server. Then later with Server 2008 and 2008 R2, they introduced something new, Server Core, right? That was the version of a server that didn't have a GUI, or has a partially, you can still run a notepad and registry editor and some of those things. And at those times, it was not possible to switch between a full server and a server core. You need to pick one during the installation process. Then with Server 2012, they changed that, and they enable us to switch between server core and the full server. They also introduced something called minimal server interface, when you can have still some GUIs if you need them, mostly to install some drivers, and then you can switch back to a server core. But it was obvious that they are moving into that direction of creating a headless server, a server that will run without any GUIs actually, right? Because GUI should not belong on a server. They should be on a desktop, right? So we can use the GUIs on a desktop to manage our servers. So this is how we actually come to Nano Server. And Nano Server is a new headless installation option. It's not a new SKU. You still have a standard and data center SKUs for Nano Server as well. It's only 64-bit, and it's optimized for cloud infrastructure, right? So what that means? That means that first, it's much smaller, right? So you don't need a lot of disk space for it. You can have a fewer ports on it as well, and fewer services running, which is also very important, because with all that stuff, when you start decreasing this attack surface as well with that. It also boots very fast, which is really important, because we want to have a shorter setup time. And it's ideal for the next generation of app development. So what that means? That means that not all applications that we were running on the, let's say, legacy server operating systems will run immediately on Nano Server. Especially this first version of Nano Server that we have now with 2016, some of those things will probably come later, right? One of the mostly requested feature is support for Active Directory services. So people want to have a domain controller running on Nano Server because Nano Server is the most secure operating system, so they think that if they can run domain controller on it, it will be much better for them than to run it on a full server, right? It makes sense. So Nano Server is perfect for containers. We will talk a little about containers. I will probably show you one demo of it. This is the latest hot thing that is coming from the IT industry. So everybody's talking about containers, and Microsoft added something new there. So we have like two different kinds of runtime for containers. They also try to provide a full developer experience for Nano Server. So if you are a developer, you can have a full debugging experience with it. So you can use Visual Studio to work on your applications that will run on Nano Server. The whole idea of Nano is just extended experience that we had before with Server Core. So roles and features live outside of Nano Server. When you install Nano Server, you get only the basic functionality, but everything else that you want to add to it, you need to install. You need to add those packages to a Server Core, which is really great thing, because if you, with that concept, your basic image of Nano Server can be really small. And with the idea to have all those packages added and the small footprint of Nano Server, you will practically create a dedicated Nano service that will run probably just one role or one feature. You will not use it as before when we work with servers on physical machines and we try to use them as possible, like putting a lot of different features on it, right? And then you will have a problem with that concept because you will have a lot of different features. Maybe they are not built to work together and you will have some issues with that. With the Nano Server, its idea is completely different. You will have just dedicated Nano servers that will run one thing and they will do that the best possible way. So they also have a full driver support for it. Anti-malware is also possible to install, but it also an external package that you will add to a Nano server. You can run Nano server almost everywhere. You can host it on a physical hardware. It can run as an operating system in a VM. That VM can be on premises or can be Azure VM. You can run it also as a Windows Server container or Hyper-V container. Right? The difference between Hyper-V containers and Windows Server container is actually just during the runtime. They will use the same image, but during the runtime you will say like, okay, I want a better isolation, and then you will run it as a Hyper-V container. And this is probably, in my opinion, one of the examples that we will see, or one of the adoptions that we'll see mostly in the future, especially during this first version of Nano, that people will run it actually as a containers, because it boots really fast, it's really small, it's easy to download the initial container image from the internet. And let me show you just how Nano Server looks like first. So I have a few running here on my machine as VMs on client Hyper-V. So the first one that I want to show you here is actually this. So this is what you see if you install and deploy Nano as a VM. And when you want to connect to it, you get actually this recovery console. So let me show you. When you log in, kind of, you get this Nano Server recovery console. So you get some basic info about your computer. You get access to a networking, to inbound and outbound firewall rules, to WinRM. WinRM is a crucial service because it enables you to remotely manage over PowerShell remoting or SIM your Nano. So in case that something is wrong, you still have a chance here to restart the service. And if you run Nano Server as a Hyper-V host, you have one more option here for working with that. So I'm running this just as a VM, so I don't have that option. So let me see. I have my card, and then you can see some information here. If you scroll here, you can see that you can see a routing table. You can toggle some settings. For firewall rules, you can disable or enable them. You cannot create them here, but you can see how to, and so you can enable and disable with F4. By the way, Nano Server works with the English keyboard only, as far as I know. And for WinRM service, as I said, you have an option to restart. And that's recovery console. So if you work with a VM, you have some problems that you cannot fix differently, this is one of the things that you will probably use to enable access to your Nano VM. Let me show you another VM that I have that I think with the GA version or RTM version of Nano Server, they introduced a switch for deploying it for developers. And if you run it with that switch, and I will show you later how to deploy it with a PowerShell, you get some kind of a little bit different view for developers. So if you connect to that VM, you are immediately transferred into a Windows PowerShell. I don't know, have you seen that before? Usually people will show you the recovery console, but with that developer switch, you will get directly into a PowerShell. You can enable debugging here, and this is actually for developers, for debugging purposes, right? If something is wrong, you go directly into PowerShell, you can kind of work here, which is kind of a cute thing. I still didn't experiment a lot with it because I discovered it recently, but it's kind of a cool. So this is how Nano Server looks like, but how can we deploy it? So it's just the installation option as a server core. As I said, it has both SKUs for standard and data center. It's not listed in a setup because you need to customize that image with drivers. So it's actually a folder on Windows Server Media, available as a folder on Windows Server Media called Nano Server. You have scripts that you need, actually the module with functions that you need there. You have a Vim file as well. So everything that you need to deploy it, it's in that folder. They provided Nano Server image generator PowerShell module that contains a couple of files, actual module and manifest file, and convert Windows image, PS1, which was actually created even before Nano Server, and it was available before on a TechNet Script Center. Then that module contains a couple of functions, not actually commandlets, but functions. New Nano Server image that you will use to create a Nano Server image. Then if you realize that you missed something, you can use Edit Nano Server image. You have Get Nano Server package to see what are the available packages for you that you can add to your Nano Server image. And you have that mentioned Convert Windows Image function. They also recently added a GUI for it. So if you are not that familiar with PowerShell, or you think you will be having a hard time using PowerShell to work on it, then you can use a GUI for it. A Nano Server image builder is introduced in October, and they provided a great blog post that will show you all the steps with all the screenshots and stuff, so I will not go through all that thing, but just to show you that it's possible for you to create a new image or a bootable USB that you can use for Nano Server deployment. You have all the experience that you will actually have also with the commandlet, so you can go through all these options, pick the packages that you want. And the great thing is that at the end, you will actually get a PowerShell command that you could run and get the same image at the end. So Nano Server GUI, image generator, GUI is actually a nice learning tool. But after that, if you want to deploy a lot of Nano servers, you will probably go back to a PowerShell. A Hyper-V team created something that is really, really important, I think, for Nano Server. especially if you want to run Nano Server as a VM, and that's called a PowerShell Direct. A PowerShell Direct is it enables you to run a PowerShell inside of a VM from a Hyper-V host without being dependent on a network stack on that VM. This is really important because that means that if you have some problems with the network stack or you messed up firewall rules, you can still have a way to connect to your VM. It works with other VMs, but we will concentrate here on Nano because with Nano it's even more crucial to have that capability to go into it without being dependent on a networking part. It also works regardless of WinRM settings, so if there is a problem with the WinRM service, you will still connect. You need to have guest VM user credentials. If you don't have it, then you will not be able to connect. You can connect to a Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016 as a VM operating system, and you can also connect from Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016. How they provided that? They actually added new parameters to invoke command and enter PS session to support VM name and VM ID. So let me show you a deployment that will also include a PowerShell Direct. That's not the one that I wanted. Okay, here's the one. So what I have here, I've actually copied the content of Nano Server folder from my installation media to my local file system here. I will import a Nano Server image generator. And you can see that I have those three functions as a part of that module. If you look at the syntax for new Nano Server image to see what's possible for you to configure, you can see there are a lot of options here. Okay, so I think it's a little bit easier if you use a show command to look at the options here. So first, you have admin password here. You can choose a different deployment type. So you can build the image to be a host to run on a bare metal or a physical machine, or to run it as a VM guest. Then you have addition. It can be standard or a data center. A base path that you will copy those files and create the images and stuff. You can specify computer name. For some of the packages, you actually have switches. For those that are not created for you, then you will say package and point to a cap file that contains the role or feature. So for those that are kind of mostly used or commonly used, you have them presented here as a switches. So you can say clustering or a compute, which means it will actually deploy a Hyper-V role in a Nano server, or create a container host if you say containers. You have some debugging switches as well, and a lot of those that are covering how to work with the networking part. So what I will do is I will actually create an image that it's not very usable because I will forget to create a networking part, and then I will use a PowerShell Direct to fix that. So I want to show you, like, even if you create an image that it's not easily accessible, you can fix that with a PowerShell Direct. So in my case, I will just create a name here. I need credentials. You can work with the VHD or VHDX images. And here I will first run it, and then I will go through, because it needs kind of a minute or something to create that. So we'll go through the parameters and the values that I specified. So because I'm already in that Nano server, I rename it to Nano server GA folder to put all the files that I need for deployment. I defined the base subfolder to create the base image for it, a target path that will be created for my image that I will use for a VM, define a name for it, I want to run it as a guest VM, so deployment type is guest. Addition is data center, admin password, and enable remote management port will enable to access it from IP addresses that are not part of the same subnet. And here I'm just putting this development switch that I've shown you, mentioned before actually, that will create that image with direct access to PowerShell for debugging purposes. Okay, so if I want to run this properly, I will also add this part for a networking part. But I didn't do that, so we will need to use a little bit of PowerShell direct magic actually to fix a networking stack when we are done. So you can see here what's happening right now. It's adding a package for running this with a guest with all the drivers that we need to run Nano as an Azure VM. And when it's done, we will have an image that we can use to create a VM. The whole process is running for a little bit more than a minute on my machine. If you have a more powerful machine, it will be even faster. It's just amazing how quick you will get a full running Nano server on your machine. And it's really small. We will see actually in the next command when this is done. We can just use this time for some questions if you have them. No? Okay. Oh, you have a question. No. I mean, depends what you want to do. So for Nano, for PowerShell Direct, you need to access your VMs from Hyper-V host. Okay? So in practice, how would that look like? You will have a Hyper-V host somewhere on premises. You will use PowerShell remoting to connect to your Hyper-V host. And then from Hyper-V host, you will use PowerShell Direct to connect to your VM. And you will not have a double hop issue there because you're first using a PowerShell remoting, and after that you're using PowerShell Direct. It doesn't even go over PowerShell remote or regular PowerShell remoting with the VNRM. It goes there over VM bus. But you cannot connect to your VMs from any other machine. You need to connect from Hyper-V host. That's a requirement. It only works like that. You cannot run Hyper-V host in Azure still, right? So you can connect, I will show you how you can connect from a portal to your Nano machines. A little bit later when we talk about server management tools. They created a new set of tools to enable that scenario that you want to connect directly to a Nano that's running in Azure VM without exposing that Nano server to a public, with a public IP address to a whole internet, okay? And with that tool, you can actually connect to a Nano that runs on premises as a VM or even on a physical machine, or Nano that runs on Azure VM. We will see that in a later demo. So now I have, someone else wanted, okay. Now that I have this image, you can see it's just 500 megabytes for a full Nano server. Just amazing thing, right? If you need to move it around, you don't need to move gigabytes for it, right? So that's very important when you deal with lots of those machines. So I will create now a new VM, generation 2, and then start it. And if I go to my Hyper-V host, you will see that I have running Nano server VM here. Voila. Oh. Wasn't that fast? It's just amazing. And the restart is also so fast that first time I did it, I thought that I didn't press a button actually. So let's try to now access the VM with a PowerShell Direct. So first, to show you how it works, like they provided this new parameter, VM name, also VM ID if you want to use ID. So I will run this just to show you that the IP address is wrong. So we will connect to a Nano VM or VM bus. You see that this is not a usable IP address that I can use to connect, so I need to fix that. So I will specify here a Nano IP address and create interactive session to my Nano VM using PowerShell Direct, you can see that the prompt has been changed to name of my Nano VM. I will get here info about interface and net adapter. After that, I will use a net shell to specify a static IP address. I need to wait sometimes like a second or two for that thing to set up properly, so I can see that now I have an IP address fixed, and I can exit now this interactive session that used PowerShell Direct, and from that point I can use a PowerShell remoting for connection. And I will use that in a management part just after a few slides, so you will see how that works. So let's talk about management of Nano server. So GUIs are nice, right? Even if this is a mostly PowerShell session, we don't have anything against GUIs, but they belong on a client, okay? We don't want to see GUIs running on a server. So with Nano server, you don't have interactive logon. You don't have RDP access. So how can we manage a Nano server? The answer is remotely, right? So PowerShell remoting or GUI tools that are enabled to work remotely as well. So actually I'm working on a session for one of the conferences next year, and the title is Nano Server Management for GUI Lovers. Because even as a PowerShell guy, I want to show them that the Microsoft put a lot of effort actually to enable GUI tools to work remotely with that idea to use them on admin station to manage Nano server. And actually to manage all the other server installation options. So everything that Microsoft created for Nano can be used with the server core or server with the desktop experience. So the benefit is even for those guys that don't want to use Nano server, which is really great. So what are the options for remote management? We can use remote graphical and web tools, as I mentioned. So server manager can be used, or server management tools. You can think about server management tools as a server management 2.0. It's Azure-based suite of tools. You will see them later. Really great work by Microsoft. You can use PowerShell remoting as the kind of a main approach for remote management. You can use SIM sessions as well, because they are using WinRM remoting. You can use PowerShell desired state configuration to configure your Nano servers, and you can also use a PowerShell Direct. So let me demo the management of Nano server for you. So now that we deployed that Nano server, I want to use PowerShell remoting and SIM to manage it. In this case, my Nano server is still in a workgroup environment, okay? So I have a laptop here, and Nano is working as VM here. So the first thing I need to do, I need to modify a trusted host list. And I did that before, so I will just show you the values that I have here, because I'm using this subnet 10.10 0 something. I can use wildcards, and I can connect to all my VMs that I'm using for demo purposes. I also have some IP addresses or fully qualified domain names for my Azure VMs as well. So the information that I need here is the IP address of my newly created Nano server, credentials, and after that I want to use the test WSMan just to check if I'm able to connect to that machine. Is there something there that it's actually listening? So for that I will use test WSMan, which is kind of a ping for WinRM remoting and PowerShell remoting. As you have seen, here I'm just using test WSMan and passing the IP address as a value for computer name. So I didn't authenticate it. I connected as an anonymous user. So I'm not getting information here about product version of anything, but if I authenticate, I'm getting information about OS version as well. It's kind of a security thing, so you need actually to authenticate to get more information about it. With PowerShell remoting, now I can create a PowerShell session. I will use a Nano IP address as a computer name, pass the credentials as well, and if everything is okay, I will have my session to Nano VM. So as you can see here, I'm connected to a configuration name Microsoft.PowerShell, which is a default session configuration. It gives me access to a full PowerShell on Nano. The PowerShell that runs on Nano is not actually the same PowerShell that we run on Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016 with the desktop experience, because those two are based on the full .NET framework. The PowerShell on Nano is based on framework core and on a core CLR, so you have kind of a subset of features, but the commonly used features and the things that we really need are there, and they are also adding things more, so we will have more of the capabilities, more commandlets and more functions available to us in the future. So now that I have this session, I can connect and work with Nano Server as I work with any machine that with the PowerShell remoting actually. So here I'm running a command just to get running services on Nano Server. As you can see, the number of those services is a little bit smaller than on a full server, which is good. I want to show you here something that it's kind of interesting. I think that's a new thing that they added to PowerShell ISC. So if you see a list of commandlets available on your machine, you enable this command add-on, and then you create interactive session to your remote machine. This list will be dynamically updated, and you will actually see the modules that are available on remote machine, not on your own. So you can see that now that I want to create interactive session to Nano Server, the commands will be updated, and I will get a list of commands that I can run on Nano. If I look at modules, you can see here that a list a little bit smaller, but still we have access to lots of different modules here on Nano Server. If you don't want to use the add-on for this, you can also get it with the get module list available, and you will see a list of all modules that you can use on Nano Server. There is one that it's new, and actually it's created because we miss some of the functionalities without them on Nano Server, and you might be familiar with those commandlets because we all wanted them even from days of PowerShell 1, and we finally got them with the PowerShell 5. That's the commandlets for working with the local users and groups. If you remember, before we use net user or we use ADSI. For that, now we have great support with commandlets. So that's the new one that we can thank, I think, Nano Server for finally getting access to commandlets for working with local users and groups. Support is really great. I just want to emphasize that because this is something that we really missed in PowerShell, and that's now fixed, and we have all those commandlets exposed to us. How many commandlets and functions I have on Nano Server? So on this installation with not any additional package, I have I have 851. During this time, I will just need some folders later, so I will just create one folder now that I will use later, and then exit the interactive session. I want to show you some other things that are added to kind of support Nano Server, but also some other installation options, and it's a great support for copying files to and from remote machines using PowerShell remoting. So here they actually added to session and from session parameter to copy item commandlet, and that enable us to copy files back and forth between a remote machine and our local machine, which is absolutely fantastic. So here I'm using a copy item with from session to copy host files from Nano to my local machine. And I will use a psedit function in ISC to open it, and then I can investigate, see if something is wrong. It's just amazing how that worked really nicely. I didn't check the performance if I really need to transfer big files, but for textual files, for scripts, those things, it works really, really nicely. I can also use toSession parameter to copy files from my local machine to remote machine. In this case, it's a Nano. And then if I go and create interactive session to my Nano server, we get another functionality here of psedit. They extended a psedit function to work with remote files. So if you create an interactive session and then you access file that exists on a remote machine, it will be open here in ISC locally, and you can see that that tab is changing to remote file. You can actually edit this file, and once when you save it, it will be saved on remote side, which is really crucial for debugging your scripts that will run on remote machines. So as I said, I'm showing you all this with Nano server, but you can use that with any remote target that has a PowerShell 5. We can also use a sim session to work with WinRM. So here what we need to have WinRM remoting enabled. It's enabled by default. So after that, I just need to create new sim session, again, passing IP and cred. And here is my sim session. It works all WSMan. Once when I have that session, I can use sim commandlets to connect, or I can use a bunch of those commandlets and functions that are sim-based, that they support sim session parameter. So as long as they support that parameter, you can use them against remote machines. So here I have get sim instance to get information about operating system. I can then pipe that to a local select command and get the name of my machine and a caption or information about operating system that is present. You can use really complex queries using WQL or WCL as well that works. Or, as I said, if you have those commandlets and they are part of the operating system that support sim session, you can use that as well. So here I'm using get net firewall rule to get information about some firewall rules that are connected to WinRM, getting the information about it. And as you can see, everything works really nicely. You then pipe that to local commands, everything works. What is even better is that you can actually work with modules that are not even present on remote machine, not even present on Nano server. So as long as you have WMI provider on a Nano server, as long as you have those WMI classes exposed on that remote machine and those modules, then you can work with it. So let me show you here that I don't have SMB share module installed on Nano server. So there is nothing here in output. But I can use get SMB share running on my local machine with a sim session parameter to get information about admin shares, in this case, on my Nano server. If I want to create a new SMB share, I can do that as well. So I just created a new one with the get SMB share. You see that I have a new one. The experience for removing is also very similar. You even get this confirmation message like, okay, do you want to remove a share? You say yes, and then the share is removed, and let me finish the cleanup of things. So this is just amazing for me that you can even use commandlets and functions that are sim-based when they don't exist on remote side, and they will still work. Really, really almost like a magical thing. So let's talk about server management tools now. Server management tools are Azure-based, and they provide you a way to connect to your machines on premises or in Azure through a gateway. So you will pick one machine in your environment, you will install a gateway software on it, just the MSI file and one configuration file on it, and from that point you will actually have connection between your machines and Azure through that gateway so that you can use tools in the browser to manage your servers. They created replacements for common GUI tools. So the tools that were before local only, like a task manager or file explorer, registry editor, they are now working in the browser. It's kind of a fantastic when you see it for the first time. You never probably thought that you can run a registry editor in a browser against a remote machine, that it's in someone else's data center all over the world. It's really interesting concept how that all works. And you have some MMC snap-ins provided as GUI tools inside of that management tool suite as well, for device manager, event viewer. Recently they added support for working against Hyper-V as well. And it's all based on WMI and PowerShell. And you can manage Nano server and server core and server with a desktop experience as well. You can, I think the current status for it is, let me see. So it's a still public preview, but it works really nicely. It's a free tool, so you can even try it if you go and enable a free trial of Azure. You can use this server and it will not be charged on your credit card. There's a list of tools that are supported here, and I'm missing one that it's recently added, that was a Hyper-V. And you can actually use that not just against 2016, but also against 2012 R2 and 2012 VMs as well, or machines as well. So let me show you how that actually looks like, because it's really cool. So what we have here is, okay. So the first thing is that you will search for server management, and then you will get options to create those connections. And you will create the first connection, and then it will tell you, okay, you will pass the IP address or a fully qualified name or a NetBIOS name, and then it will tell you, okay, do you have a gateway? If you don't have it, and you will not have it for the first time when you create the first session, then you will get the link that you need to create a gateway as well. So the experience with the gateway will be like this, that you will need to add a gateway, and you will get a generated link for you with a zip file that contains MSI file and the JSON configuration file. You need to copy that on machine that you want to promote to be a gateway. You install it there. It's one of those next installation, nothing spectacular there. And after that, you have a gateway enabled. You can get back to your connections and then connect to your VM or machine that it's connected to server management tools. Once when you are connected here, you need to authenticate in pretty much the same way as you did with the server manager. You can also save credentials securely in Azure, and then use the certificate that is present only on the gateway to decrypt those credentials to connect to your machines. You get some diagrams, basic diagrams here for it, but you get much more. You get a computer identification that you can see the name of your machines. You cannot actually join domain from here, because for Nano server you need to use offline domain join, and I will show you how to do that, but this one is already added to a domain. You have access to certificate manager and all those tools here. And one cool thing is that I want to show you, because this is a PowerShell user group, you can run PowerShell inside of a browser here and have a full access to your remote machine from here. So I can run version table, for example, here. I have a top completion. You can see that the version that I have is core, it's 5.1. What's even better, they added a script editor here, so you can create your scripts and run them here. Or you can open them, so you can run a selection or a script. It's a kind of a F5, F8 in ISC. You can also open scripts that you store on a file system of that remote machine or Azure storage. So you can use Azure storage for all your collections of PowerShell scripts and then run them from there. So here I will go to one of my storage accounts that I have. Let me see. Here I created a lot of scripts, and in scripts I have some of the functions for working with updates. So I can use, for example, get available update script. It will be open in the script editor. I can just review it here. See, okay, this works. Let me try to run this script. If I run it, it will run here, and it will give me a list of the available updates for my machine. In this case, it's a Nano machine. So it's just amazing that you can create a nice repository of all those scripts in Azure storage, and then you can use that against all your VMs that you are managing with server management tools. You can upload them as a bulk of things that you want and have, and they're running there. So it's running. I'm missing 2 updates for this machine. So let me show you this other one that I've connected, that it's not part of the main. And for this one, I think that I haven't stored credentials. Okay, but I used them before, so it's still remembered there. And if I look at computer identification, you can see that's still in a work group. So I want to add this machine to the main. I need to go to my other machine that exists on the main. It's on the same subnet as this Nano machine. I need to check the trusted host list. So I have here a different subnet that I'm using. So you need to fix that first, because you are connecting to a workgroup machine, right? So you cannot use still Kerberos for authentication. My machine has a IP address of 10.0.0.8. And I need a name for it. I need to authenticate. Let me check authentication. So everything works. So I will use a djoin here to create a blob. Then I will open a session to that Nano VM. Once when I have it, I will use copy item to copy blob to that remote machine. And now I will create interactive session to that machine so that I can actually run a djoin on a remote machine. It will load that blob. And now I want to shut down machine, but not immediately, because I want to exit nicely. So I have 5 seconds to exit. And now when that machine restart, it will be added to the main. Okay. So we can check that. Usually that restart is fast. So when that happens, when I create connection to 10.0.0.8, if I'm lucky, it will be connected, but sometimes you need to wait a couple of seconds for that. So this is something that usually happens when machine is still not ready and I want to connect. So let me try it again. So now machine is restarted. And if I look at computer identification, you can see that my machine is joined to the main. Really nice, right? Everything remotely, right? So everything works, and you just need a couple of lines of script. Everything that we use here is a new capabilities of copy item, and then we created interactive session, executed there, restarted remotely, and now machine is joined to the main, and you can use Kerberos for connection and work with it as it's just a part of the main. So everything is fixed. Really, really cool stuff. So here's a list of resources and feedback. I can give you slides later, so you will have them. This is just for reference for you. And I'm not aware of how I'm staying with time. So I started a little bit late. So I have like a 10 minutes, right? Okay, so I have some additional demos that I want to show you. One of those is that all those things that you have seen performed in the Server Management Tools GUI, they also have commandlets for it. So some of those things are available now through commandlets, through Powershell. So you don't even need to go to a GUI. They're still working on it. It's still a preview, so not all scenarios are possible. But let me show you something that works. So here I need first to authenticate to Azure using Azure PowerShell commandlets. Okay, so now I'm authenticated. I need credentials for my local user on machine. And then I can create a session using this new commandlet that it's part of server management module, new Azure RM server management session. I need a resource name, the IP address as a node name, and credentials. So now I have that session created. I can show you a session object. So that's the session object, nothing special to see here. So now that I have that session, I can use invoke Azure RM server management PowerShell command, not the shortest command that I've used, to actually target that machine using that session and execute, in this case, get module list available. Okay. So it's very similar to invoke command, but it goes a little bit differently. It targets first the gateway, and then it jumps from a gateway to your machine, and it will give me a list of modules on that machine if everything works properly. So I really hope that they will improve the server management tools commandlets in the future. So you can see we have a list here of all the modules on that remote machine. We can execute whatever we want actually here. There's one more thing that I mentioned here. I mentioned containers. So I want to show you something cool here that I created actually to test the open source PowerShell. You might have heard that in August, PowerShell team has announced open source PowerShell. It's still alpha, it's still work in progress. Community has is really happy with it, and community is helping to develop open source PowerShell. So I'm using containers, actually, Nano server container, to test open source PowerShell running on it. And I want to show you how can you do that. So what I have here is a Docker file, which is just a textual file with some instructions to build a container. And what's interesting here that I will download the file that contains latest version of open source PowerShell. Then I will unblock it. Then extract the content of that file to a folder, and then they provide an install PowerShell remoting script that will create a session configuration, and we will talk more about session configuration in the next GIA session. So this is kind of a warm-up for you for that one. We need to run it twice because they have some bug, so you need to run it twice, and first when you run it, you actually silently continue with the error, and then you repeat the thing. At the end, you get that image created for you. And just to show you so I will not actually build it. but I will show you the output. So it goes through all those steps, and at the end you get the container image that contains an installation of Nano server with that additional open source PowerShell to it. So at that moment I actually have two PowerShells on that machine. I have the PowerShell core that comes with Nano server, and I also have open source PowerShell on it. But I cannot work on open source PowerShell directly. So I need to remotely connect to a session configuration that is exposing that open source PowerShell for me. So I actually pick, do I want to remotely connect to a PowerShell 5.1 and work against that one, or I want to connect to PowerShell 6 Alpha 13 and work against that one, kind of a test things. So to run with that, I will need a command prompt just to create a container. And let's see, it's a little bit slower than I expected. Come on. Yes. I'm not actually sure. We can check after. Yeah, it's available. I mean, it's available in a PowerShell, but I don't know if it's available in PowerShell on Nano. I should check later. I don't remember actually. So now I'm in a container. Here, even if I think I can run host name, so I can show you this is a name of container. If I run PS version table on it, inside of container, you can see this is a version 5.1, okay? But if I enumerate PS session configurations that I have on this machine, on this container, I'm waiting for tab completion. You can see here that thanks to that Docker file and that image that I created, I have actually two session configurations. I have the default one, Microsoft.PowerShell, and I have one that enables me to connect to open source PowerShell 6 Alpha 13. So how can I connect to that one? I can go back here to my PowerShell ISC, and I need ID because they extended Enter PS session with container ID as well. You remember how they did that for PowerShell Direct? They also added new parameters for working with containers. So I will need ID of my container. The ID is a little bit longer, so it's hard to remember it. You need to use PowerShell for it. And now I will use Enter PS session with container ID. Connect not to default one Microsoft.PowerShell, but to this one that connects to open source PowerShell. The prompt should change to ID of a container. And if I look now at PS version table, you can see that I'm connected to open source PowerShell. So now I can test open source PowerShell inside of this Nano server container and kind of compare the differences and see if something is wrong or is working properly. So this is a really, I think, cool demo that can show you a Nano server and containers and open source PowerShell and all that together in one mind-blowing demo. So this is the end of my Nano server session. Thank you for attention, and after a short break we will continue with just enough administration. Thank you.